Hello, girls and boys. Welcome to Storytime Fun. We hope you enjoy it. Today's story is out of the Walt Disney Storyland book. And today's story is called Snow White. Once upon a time in a faraway land, a lovely queen sat by her window sewing. As she worked, she pricked her finger with a needle. 3 drops of blood fell on the snow-white linen. How happy I would be if I had a little girl with lips as red as blood, skin as white as snow, and her hair as black as ebony, thought the queen as she sewed. When spring came, her wish was granted. A little daughter was born to the queen and king. She was all her mother had desired. But the queen's happiness was very brief, as she whispered, "Little Snow White," and then she died. When the lonely king married again, his new queen was beautiful, but alas, she was also very heartless and cruel. She was very jealous of all the lovely ladies of the kingdom, but most jealous of all of the lovely little princess, Snow White. Now, the queen's most prized possession was her magic mirror. Every day she looked into it and asked, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of us all?" If the magic mirror replied that she was the fairest in the kingdom, all was well. But if another lady was named, the queen flew into a furious rage. She would summon her huntsman and have her killed. As the years passed, Snow White grew more and more beautiful, and her sweet nature made everyone in the kingdom love her. Everyone but the queen. The queen's chief fear was that Snow White might grow to be the fairest in the land. So she banished the young princess to the servants' quarters. She made Snow White dress in rags and forced her to slave from morning to night. But while she worked and lived in the servants' quarters, Snow White dreamed dreams of a handsome prince who would come someday and carry her off to his castle in the clouds. And as she dusted and scrubbed and dreamed, Snow White grew more beautiful day by day. At last came the day the queen had been dreading. She asked, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of us all?" And the mirror replied, "Her lips blood red, her hair like night, her skin like snow, her name Snow White." The queen's face grew pale with anger. The queen rushed from the room and called her huntsman to her. "Take the Princess Snow White into the forest and bring me back her heart in this jeweled box," she said. The huntsman bowed his head in grief. He had no choice but to obey the cruel queen's command. Snow White had no fear of the kindly huntsman. She went happily into the forest with him. It was beautiful there among the trees, and the princess, not knowing what was in store for her, skipped along beside the huntsman, now stopping to pick violets, now singing a happy tune. The huntsman watched Snow White as she skipped and sang through the forest. At last the poor huntsman could bear it no longer. He fell to his knees before the princess. "I cannot kill you, princess," he said, "even though it is the queen's command. Run into the forest and hide, but you must never return to the castle." Then away went the huntsman. On his way back to the castle, he killed a small animal and took its heart in the jeweled box to the wicked queen. Alone in the forest, Snow White wept with fright. Deeper and deeper into the woods she ran, half blinded by tears. It seemed to her that roots of trees reached up to trip her feet, that branches reached out to clutch at her dress as she passed. At last, weak with terror, Snow White fell to the ground. As the sun began to set, she lay there sobbing her heart out. Ever so quietly, out from the burrows and nests in hollow trees, crept the little woodland animals. Bunnies and chipmunks, raccoons and squirrels gathered around to keep watch over her. When Snow White looked up and saw them there, she smiled through her tears. At the sight of her smile, the little animals crept closer, snuggling in her lap or nestling in her arms. The birds sang their gayest melody to Snow White, and the little forest clearing was filled with joy. "I feel ever so much better now," Snow White told her new friends, "but I still do need a place to sleep." One of the birds chirped something. The little animals nodded in agreement. Then off flew the birds, leading the way. The rabbits, the chipmunks, and the squirrels followed after, and Snow White came along with her arm around the neck of a gentle mother deer. At last, through a tangle of brush, Snow White saw a tiny cottage, which was nestled in a clearing just up ahead. "It's just like a doll's house," she clapped her hands in delight. Skipping across a little bridge to the house, Snow White peeked in through one window pane. There seemed to be no one at home, but the sink was piled high with cups and saucers and plates which looked as though they had never been washed. Dirty little shirts and wrinkled little trousers hung over the chairs, and everything was blanketed with dust. "Maybe the children who live here have no mother," said Snow White, "and need someone to take care of them. Let's clean this house and surprise them." So in she went, followed by her forest friends. Snow White found an old broom in the corner and swept the floor while the little animals did their best to help. Then Snow White washed all the crumpled little clothes and set a kettle of delicious soup to bubbling on the hearth. "Now," she said to the animals, "let's see what's upstairs." The woodland animals followed Snow White up the stairs. There they found 7 little beds in a row. "Why, they have their names carved on them," said Snow White. "Doc, Happy, Sneezy, Dopey, such funny names for children. Grumpy, Bashful, and Sleepy. My, I'm a little sleepy myself." Yawning, oh my, Snow White sank down across the little beds and fell asleep. Quietly, the little animals stole away, and the birds flew out the window. All was still in the tiny little house in the forest. "Hi-ho, hi-ho, it's home from work we go." The 7 little men came marching through the woods, singing on their way. As they came in sight of their cottage, they stopped short. Smoke was curling from the chimney, and the door was standing open. Look, someone's in our house. Maybe it's a ghost or a goblin or even a demon. I knew it, said one of the little men with a grumpy look. I've been warning you for 200 years. Something awful was about to happen. At last, on timid tiptoe, in they went. Someone's stolen our dishes, growled the grumpy one. No, they're hidden in the cupboard, said Happy with a grin. But hey, my cup's been washed. Sugar's all gone. At that moment, a sound came from upstairs. It was Snow White yawning and turning in her sleep. It's up there, the goblin or demon or ghost, said one of the scared little men. Shouldering their pickaxes, up the stairs they went. 7 frightened little dwarfs. The 7 little men stood in a row at the foot of their beds. They all stared at the sleeping Snow White. Whoa, what is it? Whispered one. It's mighty purty, said another. Why, bless my soul, I think it's a girl, said a third. And then Snow White woke up. Why, you're not little children, she exclaimed. You're little men. Let me see if I can guess your names. And she did. Doc and Bashful, Happy, Sleepy, and Sneezy, and last of all, Dopey and Grumpy too. Supper is not quite ready, said Snow White. You'll just have enough time to wash and change your clothes. Wash? Cried the little men with horror in their tones. They hadn't washed for, it seemed hundreds of years. But out they marched when Snow White insisted, and it was worth it in the end, for such a supper they had never tasted. Yummy in their tummies. Nor had they ever had such an evening of fun. All the forest folk gathered around the cottage window to watch them play and dance and sing. Back at the castle, the huntsman had presented to the wicked queen the box which she thought held Snow White's heart. Aha! She gloated at last. And down the castle corridors she hurried straight to her magic mirror. Then she asked, Now, magic mirror on the wall, who's the fairest one of all? But the honest mirror replied, With the 7 dwarfs we'll spend the night, the fairest in the land, Snow White. Then the queen realized the huntsman had tricked her. She flung the jeweled box at the mirror, shattering the glass into 1,000 pieces. Then, shaking with rage, the queen hurried down to the dark cave below the palace, where she worked her black magic. First, she disguised herself as a toothless old woman dressed in tattered rags. Then she searched her books of magic spells for a horrible spell to work on Snow White. What shall it be? She muttered to herself. The poisoned apple? The sleeping death? Perfect. In a great kettle, she stirred up a poison brew. Then she dipped an apple into it. 1, 2, 3, and the apple came out a beautiful rosy red, the most tempting apple you could hope to see. Cackling with wicked pleasure, the queen dropped her poisoned apple into a basket of fruit and started on her journey to the home of the 7 dwarfs. She felt certain that her plan would be successful, for the magic spell of the sleeping death could only be broken by the lovers' first kiss. The queen was certain no lover would find Snow White asleep in the forest. It was morning when the queen reached the great forest, close to the dwarf's cottage. From her hiding place, she saw Snow White saying goodbye to the 7 little men as they marched off to work. "Now be careful," they warned her. "Watch out for the queen." But when the poor ragged old woman with a basket of apples appeared outside her window, Snow White never thought to be afraid. She gave the old woman a drink of water and spoke to her so kindly. "Thank you, my dear," the queen cackled. "Now, in return, won't you have one of my beautiful apples?" And she held out to Snow White the poisoned fruit. Down swooped the little birds and animals, pecking and clawing at the wicked queen. "Stop it," Snow White cried. "Shame on you." Then she took the poisoned apple and bit into it and fell down lifeless on the cottage floor. Away went the frantic birds and woodland animals into their woods to warn the 7 dwarfs. Now the dwarfs had decided not to work their regular jobs that day. They worked hard at work making a gift for Snow White all day to tell her of their love. The 7 little dwarfs looked up in surprise as the birds and the animals crowded around. They realized that Snow White must be in trouble. "The queen!" they cried, and they ran for home. The little men were too late. They came racing into the clearing just in time to see the queen slide away into the shadows. They chased her through the gloomy woods until she plunged into the bottomless gulf and disappeared forever. But that did not bring Snow White back to life. When the dwarfs came home, they found Snow White lying as if asleep. They built her a bed of crystal and gold and set it up in the forest. There they kept watch, night and day. After a time, a handsome prince of a nearby kingdom heard travelers tell of the lovely princess asleep in the forest, and he rode there to see her. At once he knew that he loved her truly. So he knelt beside her and kissed her lips. At the touch of love's first kiss, Snow White awoke. There, bending over her, was the prince of her dreams. Snow White knew that she loved him too. She said goodbye to the 7 dwarfs and rode off with the prince to his castle of dreams come true. Well, that's it for today. We'll see you next time.